Welcome back to the deep dive. We're about to jump into a chapter from Dan Ariely's Predictably Irrational that, honestly, it really shifted how I think about decision making. Maybe my own, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those chapters that tackles a pretty, let's say, uncomfortable truth about us, isn't it? The idea that the calm, cool us isn't quite the same person when emotions, take over.
Exactly. We're diving into Chapter 5, The Influence of Arousal, why hot is much hotter than we realize. And the core idea is just how powerful, sometimes shocking, these intense emotions, what Ariely calls the hot state, are.
Right. And critically, how unbelievably bad we are at predicting how we'll act when we're in that state.
So that's kind of the mission for this deep dive, right? To really get our heads around this gap, this sometimes dangerous disconnect between the cold state, thus calm, rational, and the hot state, us, when we're gripped by intense feelings.
We'll be using Ariely's work, specifically a fascinating study he describes, as our guide to understanding that gap.
Okay, let's unpack this study then. The book starts with this pretty provocative thought. Even smart, rational people really struggle to guess how much their own views and choices will just completely change when they go from calm to, well, passionate or aroused.
Yeah, and to really test this, Dan Ariely and George Lowenstein set up this pretty ingenious experiment over at Berkeley. They didn't just want to ask people to imagine being aroused.
Right, they wanted to see what happened when they actually were.
Exactly. Observe them in that state.
And the book explains why they chose sexual arousal for this particular study. Part practical, part relevant, right?
It's an intense emotion. It's familiar to the target group, male college students in their 20s, so it was relatively easy to induce and measure.
Plus, understanding it has real-world implications. Things like, teen pregnancy, STIs.
Precisely. And yeah, the participants were those specific students, the source notes, maybe a bit clinically, that inducing this state was considered more straightforward with that group.
I bet getting approval for something like this wasn't easy, though. The book mentions some hurdles with ethics reviews.
Yeah, it definitely touches on that. It just shows how studying something like sex, even academically, can still be, a bit sensitive.
So the setup, how do they actually capture the difference between the cool-headed person and the hot state person?
Okay, so it happened in two main phases, usually on different days for each participant. First up was the cold state.
Okay.
Participants answered a whole list of questions while they were completely calm, rational, but they had to imagine being intensely sexually aroused.
So sitting there, cool as a cucumber, trying to think like their future aroused self might think.
Exactly that. Using a computer, standard setup, then came phase 2, the hot state.
Right. This is where it gets real.
Yeah. Here they were instructed to privately induce a state of actual sexual arousal using materials the researchers provided, erotic pictures, that sort of thing.
And then answer the questions.
Then they answered the exact same questions, but while genuinely experiencing that intense arousal.
And that detail about the saran wrap laptop always sticks with me. The participant joking, didn't know computers could get pregnant. It kind of grounds it, makes it feel real.
It does add a touch of, well, maybe dark humor, but it highlights the practical realities of running a study like this.
The book even paints a picture of a typical participant, gives him the name Roy, accomplished, smart, biology major, plays volleyball like Chopin and techno.
Right, into sushi, politically conservative, steady girlfriend, plans for med school, all the markers of someone who, in his day-to-day life, is probably seen as thoughtful, responsible.
Your typical cold state, rational guy.
Seems like it. And he went through the whole consent process, knew what he was signing up for.
Okay, so this rational Roy sits down. What kind of questions are they hitting him with in these two different states?
Well, the questions were designed to really probe boundaries, maybe even uncomfortable thoughts or potential behaviors. The source groups them. First, sexual preferences. Things like finding unexpected things, erotic, maybe women's shoes, attraction to people much older or younger, different body types, interest in threesomes, bondage, even whether just kissing feels frustrating. And quite controversially, interest in contact with animals.
Wow, okay. Some of those are definitely pushing boundaries.
They really are. Then, a second really crucial category, propensity for immoral behaviors.
Uh-oh, what falls under that?
Questions about using tactics to increase the chance of sex, like, would you take someone to a fancy restaurant just for that reason? Say, I love you, when you don't mean it. Encourage drinking.
Manipulative stuff.
Exactly. And then, more seriously, would you keep trying to initiate sex after your date clearly said no? And the most extreme one, Would you consider slipping a woman a date rape drug?
Whoa, okay. That last one really hits hard. It shows the kind of dark potential they were trying to measure.
It absolutely does. And the third set focused on safe sex and condoms.
Right. Important stuff.
Yeah. Questions like, do condoms decrease pleasure? Do they interfere with spontaneity? Would you always use one with a new partner? Would you still use one if you were worried she might change her mind while you went to get it?
Okay, so they got answers to all that from the same person, once imagining arousal, once actually feeling it. What did they find? What was the big reveal?
This is where, yeah, it gets really interesting and maybe a little disturbing. The main finding was crystal clear and pretty dramatic.
Mm.
People answered those questions very differently depending on the state they were in.
Not just a little different, right? The source gives percentages that are kind of staggering.
Totally staggering. Just looking at the general desire for various sexual activities when they were actually aroused,
Yeah.
in the hot state, they predicted their desire would be, on average, 72% higher than what they predicted in the cold state.
72% higher, just by being aroused. That's huge.
It's a massive jump, and for some specific things, even wilder. The prediction for enjoying contact with animals, 167% higher when aroused.
Right.
Sex with a 60-year-old woman. Their prediction jumped 229% in the high state.
Okay, those numbers are wild. But what about the darker stuff, the immoral behavior questions?
That's where it gets, frankly, quite chilling. Their predicted likelihood of engaging in immoral acts shot up by 136% when they were actually aroused.
136%.
Yeah. Think about specific examples from the source. Continuing to push for sex after being told no. They predicted they'd be 125% more likely to do that when aroused.
That's deeply concerning.
And slipping someone a drug. The prediction for doing that was 420% higher in the hot state versus the cold state.
420%. That's almost hard to comprehend. It just hammers home how much that state can change someone's predicted moral compass.
It really underscores the sheer power of that shift. And safe sex. Even though they knew the risks intellectually, in the hot state they were 25% less likely to predict they'd always use a condom.
And their feelings about condoms changed, too.
Yet beliefs that condoms reduce pleasure or ruin spontaneity became much stronger when they were actually aroused.
So our Roy, in his calm state, sees himself as, respectful, moral, safe. But the person answering those questions when aroused predicts a self who's way more interested in fringe stuff, way more willing to consider unethical, even illegal actions, and way less concerned about safety.
Like the source says, they just completely underestimated their reactions.
It really drives home this core insight, doesn't it? It's not just that emotions change us, it's that we seem to be shockingly bad at knowing how much they'll change us, how much our desires, our judgments, our actual decisions will warp.
It's almost like a different person takes control. And crucially, the calm person doesn't seem to really know that other person very well at all.
Yeah, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde analogy from the book feels so spot on here. It's not just that we have these two sides.
Right. It's that Dr. Jekyll seems almost clueless about what Mr. Hyde is capable of when that potion, that hot state, takes effect. And Hyde seems capable of things Jekyll wouldn't even dream of.
And what's really striking is that the book notes this doesn't seem to get better with experience. Sexual arousal isn't exactly a rare feeling, yet we keep underestimating its power.
Again and again. It's a systematic blind spot.
So, okay, this core finding, we're terrible predictors of our hot state selves. What does that mean beyond the specific study on sexual arousal?
Well, what's really powerful is the suggestion that this isn't just about sex. The source strongly implies this principle applies across the board to other intense emotional states.
Like anger, hunger, fear.
Exactly. Anger, hunger, intense excitement, jealousy, fear. These can all function as potent hot states. They can warp our judgment, change our priorities, make us act in ways that our calm, rational self would find completely foreign.
So the big lesson isn't just about sex ed, it's a broader warning. Be really wary of situations where strong emotions might take the reins and unleash that inner Mr. Hyde we don't even realize is lurking there.
Precisely. And building on that, the book offers some really practical strategies for dealing with this reality, for navigating a world where we know our future self might go off the rails in ways our current self can't foresee or wouldn't approve of.
Like, you mentioned anger. How does this apply there?
Yeah, the classic example. You get a really critical email, you feel that surge of anger, that immediate urge to fire back. That's the hot state.
We've all been there.
Right.
Yeah.
So the advice, based on this research, is go ahead, write that furious reply, get it all out. but do not hit send.
Wait until you cool down.
Exactly. Wait until you're back in the cold state. Then your rational self can look at what your angry self wrote and decide if that's really the message you want to convey. You're putting the decision back in the hands of Dr. Jekyll.
That makes so much sense. It explains why waiting is often good advice. What about bigger things, like buying a car?
Oh yeah, great example from the source. Think about that test drive. The excitement, the new car smell, the salesperson pushing the thrill. That's all designed to put you in a hot state of desire.
And suddenly, the practical minivan plan goes out the window for the flashy sports car.
It happens. The excitement overrides the rational plan. So the strategy, don't decide in the hot state, step away, sleep on it. Let the emotional heat dissipate so your cold, rational self can make the final call based on what you actually need and plan for.
And applying this to safe sex again, the book is pretty critical of just telling people, just say no, isn't it?
It really is. It basically argues that approach ignores the reality of the hot state, expecting someone overwhelmed by sexual arousal to simply access their cold state willpower and rationally say no is, well, predictably irrational, based on this study.
The hot state just steamrolls that intention.
It seems to, significantly. So willpower in the moment is likely not enough. The source pushes for solutions that don't rely on that hot state self-control.
Like what?
Like making condoms incredibly available. Right there, easy access. Don't make someone interrupt the heat of the moment to go searching. Minimize the barrier.
Makes sense.
And sex education needs to be more than just biology. It needs to tackle the emotions, the psychology of arousal. Teach strategies for anticipating and managing the hot state itself, not just pretending it won't overpower rational thought.
And the source suggests the best strategy, if you really want to avoid certain outcomes.
Avoid the temptation before it hits. It's about proactive avoidance, not reactive resistance. Make the decision in the cold state to steer clear of situations that you know will trigger an overwhelming hot state. That's far more effective than trying to fight the urge once it's already strong.
That seems like a principle that applies way beyond sex, too.
Absolutely. The source uses safe driving, especially with teenagers, as another key example. It's not just inexperience causing accidents, it's the hot state elements.
Friends in the car, loud music, showing off.
Yeah, all that excitement and social pressure. And there's that really stark statistic the source mentions.
About passengers.
Right. A teen driving alone is riskier than an adult, sure. But add one teenage passenger. Crash risk doubles. Add a third, it doubles again. That social hot state is incredibly distracting and impairs judgment.
That's just terrifying, actually. And the book suggests tech solutions, ones that don't rely on the team fighting the hot state.
Exactly. Things like maybe a modified car system set up by the parents in their cold state, of course. If the teen breaks rules, like speeding, maybe the system automatically changes the music.
To something embarrassing, like classical, as the source jokes.
Yeah. Or adjust the heat uncomfortably, or, and this is the big one, maybe even automatically calls mom and dad.
Huh. Now that would definitely cool things down fast. It's using cold state planning to impose limits during likely hot states.
It's trying to bridge that gap using technology because willpower alone might fail.
There was one more example that really drove this home for me, making decisions about difficult future experiences you can't really imagine yet, like childbirth.
Ah, yes, the epidural decision. So many people, especially first-time parents, might decide beforehand in their calm, cold state, absolutely no painkillers. But they're deciding without truly grasping the intensity of labor, the future hot state.
And the author talks about his wife, Sumi, and the ice bucket test her birth coach suggested.
Right, plunging her hands into ice water for 2 minutes. Not fun, but designed to give her a small, simulated taste of that intense pain, that hot state, before the real event.
So she could make a more informed choice from her cold state, having had a glimpse of the hot state.
Exactly. And the source says it worked. That brief exposure helped her understand why someone would want pain relief. And apparently, when the time came, well, let's just say the anesthesiologist became very popular.
A pretty vivid illustration of how different our perspective is in the heat of the moment.
It really highlights the value of trying to understand or even simulate that future hot state's pull while you're still calm and rational.
So, if we pull all this together from our deep dive today, the fundamental takeaway from Airily seems to be we're kind of split personalities. There's the rational cold self and the emotional hot self.
And the cold self is consistently, remarkably terrible at predicting what the hot self will want or do when it takes the wheel.
The source even suggests maybe we're not one coherent self, but like a collection of multiple selves fighting for control.
Yeah, an agglomeration, I think is the word used, each activated by different states.
The Jekyll and Hyde thing isn't just a story. It feels like a description of this internal reality, which leaves us with a pretty big final question, doesn't it?
It really does. If we know this emotional hide self exists, and it can pop up so powerfully and unpredictably, how on earth do we make reliable plans for our future?
Yeah, how much trust should we place in our calm intentions today when we know those intentions are for a future moment where we might feel completely different, be almost a different person?
And if we know our hot state self can lead us astray, can we actually do anything now, in the cold state, to sort of bind that future self, to compel Mr. Hyde to behave a bit better, more like Dr. Jekyll once?
That feels like the million-dollar question.
And according to the book, that's exactly where the next chapter heads. It dives right into self-control, procrastination, why we struggle so much, building directly on this idea of our divided selves.
Ah, okay. So moving from diagnosing the problem, the hot-cold gap, to exploring the struggle for control sounds like the perfect next step.
Definitely feels like a logical progression.
Well, this has been fascinating, really digging into the surprising power of these emotional states. Thank you for walking us through it.
My pleasure. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? Understanding our own predictable irrationality, especially when things heat up, is pretty crucial for navigating life.
Absolutely. We hope you join us next time as we continue our deep dive into Predictably Irrational and tackle that very challenge, the battle for self-control.